They contacted law enforcement. They broke up the ring, and there were 11 girls in the hotel at that time that were being trafficked. It hit me when I got into these leadership roles in hospitality that I can make a major impact.
How many people ended up being trained? Over 1 million, right?
The goal was make sure every hotel employee is trained.
We were traveling and came across a labor trafficking ring, but we were in front of a Marriott property, and knowing that they had been trained was instrumental.
And that's what it's all about. It's like, look for the signs, and then who do you contact, right? Because if you see things and you're like, I don't know who to talk to, that's not good.
Simply Report, the tool that we just launched, is so critical.
Your product allows someone to take what they see or hear and share it in a very easy way.
It's incredible to see that this awareness and deep training is actually converting into live state.
If we are committed to this, the goal should be no trafficking whatsoever.
From all of your lenses of expertise, what is it that you would want people to remember? Hello, friends, and welcome to the Team Protectors podcast. I'm Brittany Dunn, COO and co-founder of Safe House Project, joined today by my co-host.
I'm Christy Wells. I'm the CEO and other co-founder of Safe House Project. Safe House Project is a national anti-trafficking organization that helps train individuals to identify and respond to trafficking. We help victims escape their trafficking situation and access holistic care. And most importantly, we're uniting communities across America because we want to see trafficking eradicated by 2030. That's not a statement of what we can do as our own organization, but it's a rally cry for people to join in and be part of a community to eradicate trafficking. So,
great. Well, we are joined today by a very special guest, Chip Rogers. This man's resume is so long that I'm going to pull out a few highlights in here because otherwise we'd be here all day, sir.
It's not that impressive, but go ahead.
Okay. Well,
I'm interested to hear what you're going to pull out.
Well, first of all, he was a radio talk show host
That
back
is
in
true,
the
yes.
day. He's a dad of 4 kids, which is always a blessing.
4 adults now, yeah.
4 adult children. I hear they're more work at that stage.
No, more expensive. But
More
not-
expensive.
not more
Okay,
work, yeah.
good to know. I'll start saving. He was in the Georgia State Senate as the majority leader.
Mm-hmm.
He was the president of American Hotel and Lodging Association.
Yep.
And now he is out supporting a lot of different organizations through consulting and really leading the way in so many different areas. So obviously today we're talking about human trafficking, but we'll also be kind of guiding from his expertise as a business leader, as a policymaker, and as a fierce advocate for the vulnerable. So welcome to the show.
I am glad to be on the show. It's always nice to be on this side of the microphone,
Yeah.
where I'm not having to ask the questions. But I might fall back into my old tendencies and ask a few questions.
We love it. That's what we're here for.
So I'll give you a quick story. When I bought this radio station, and it was a country music station. This is a long time ago on the AM dial, which
Wow.
doesn't really
Didn't
work,
really
right?
happen.
Yeah, and but I'm thinking about that sitting in the studio, and I was turning it in from country into a news talk station. But we were like, how do we not lose all the country music folks that are our only listeners right now as we gain people that care more about news and talk? And I had behind me this giant wall of country music CDs. I mean, thousands and thousands of them. And I was never going to use them for any purpose. And so I'm like, here's what I'll do. Every hour we'll ask a trivia question and give away one of these CDs. And so it took me a couple years, but we got rid of every single one of them. But in the process, built up thousands and thousands of listeners who just wanted a country music CD. And I was shocked at the time, but people would drive all the way to the station just to pick up their CD.
Were they signed?
No, they weren't signed. They were just
They're
CDs.
just old CDs.
Yeah, but this is before like you had, digital music in a format
Right.
of people would download things.
Right.
Yeah, this is in the 90s. So
Well, that's fantastic. Christy and I walked in here today singing, "Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble," bringing back some really great country favorites. So
maybe you should have a CD.
No.
Last year there were more vinyl records sold than CDs.
Really?
Mhm.
Well, I guess more than CDs. I guess that would make sense.
Yeah.
And I
We've-
don't think
we've
I've
gone
seen
back,
a CD player
yes.
in a while.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, diving in, can you share just a little bit about your journey of how did trafficking come onto your radar and kind of what made you inspired by this issue?
It hit my radar a few times. And I'm almost ashamed to say the first time around, I wasn't able to do a lot about it. Or I could have done a lot about it, and I didn't. It was back when I was a lawmaker. I was working in 2 areas, and I'd written some laws. I'd written some comprehensive laws on some things that law enforcement came to me and said, hey, when you write laws, you're dealing with what's known as code sections. And so sometimes people see an opportunity to amend a code section that you may not intend to change, but they see it as an opportunity. And law enforcement came to me and said, look, we really need to update our trafficking statutes in the state of Georgia. Would you be okay with this language being added? And I did. I didn't think anything of it. And it passed, and they were very grateful, and I'm assuming that it helped. I didn't really follow up on that in a way that I should. It was at that right around that same time I began working on an issue of stopping dog fighting in Georgia. And you would think, well, what's that got to do with it? Well, the reality is these same evil, demented people that get involved in dog fighting are also in human trafficking and weapons transport and drugs and everything else. And so it's that same collection of people. And what's interesting in that one is I did follow up on that, and I'm still in touch with the young lady that helped me write that law. And she's back in Georgia, and she sends me stuff all the time about convictions. And a lot of times these folks that are getting convicted on this are also being convicted on other trafficking type related stuff, or the investigations lead them in that direction. And so that's when I really began to think about it then. And then when I got into the hospitality industry, I knew it was out there. And I saw an incredible opportunity to take an industry who intuitively knew that it was going on and actually was taking steps to stop it, but didn't really know how to do that. There was no collective effort. There was no universal recognition that the industry could do something very positive. And back in those days, it was kind of a hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. No one wanted trafficking.
Right.
No one supported it in any way that I was aware of. But they just didn't know what to do. So they didn't want to talk about it. And as you guys know, getting over that first hurdle of a very dark subject is you have to get past that before you can accomplish anything after that. And so that it hit me when I got into these leadership roles in hospitality that, yeah, I can do something for an industry that could make a major impact.
I remember the first time we got to visit the AHLA offices, and everything that just comes out of there feels warm and so approachable and all of that. The hospitality industry truly sets the bar in so many ways, and especially those who are part of AHLA. So how did you kind of help people overcome that initial barrier of this is a really hard issue, it's a dark issue, and for that group who, really focuses on a lot of the positives of life, what were some of those initial kind of conversations, I guess?
So before I was at HLA, I ran another organization called AHOA, which is essentially the largest hotel owners association in the world, frankly. And, when you're talking about things in this realm that as human beings we see and we say, someone should do something about that. Oftentimes you're left with, well, I'm against human trafficking, but I'm sure there's somebody out there taking care of it.
Sure.
Right? And I think that's the reaction you got from a lot of, at that time, hotel owners was, look, we don't want any part of this. We definitely don't want it on our properties, but we really don't want to talk about it and let somebody else handle it. So I always made the case that morally we should all be linked on this and say universally we stand against human trafficking. But I had to make another appeal to them. And the appeal really was, it's actually good for your business to do this. Because as you very well know, there are lawsuits aimed at lots of folks from the people that facilitate this to hotel owners to even hotel brands that may have nothing to do with it. But the lawyers say, we're going to cast a wide net. And I understand the purpose of doing that. So I would tell hotel owners, like, look, even if you've got so much going on in your life that you don't want to take on another cause, do this for your business. Make sure your employees are trained. Make sure you're doing everything you possibly can to prevent it from happening on your property. Because if it does happen on your property, that could be a major liability for you. And so I took that, and then when I went to AHLA, I'm like, now, I'm in a position where we're representing the entire industry from owners to brands to management companies and all the vendors that play a part in that. Like, how can we create something that is universal to everybody so that we're all focused on this? And then that's when we came up with the No Room for Trafficking campaign, and it has been incredibly successful.
No, that's great. I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is the legislation that Congress passed originally in 2000, it allows for survivors to press charges against those who may or should have known about the trafficking happening on their properties. And that's why the hotels have come under these intense lawsuits. And so I think that's just one of those ways that rather than shying away from the problem, the hoteliers have said, how can we really come around the issue and be intentional in our initiatives to combat it and dismantle it?
Yeah, so at AHLA, we worked with Marriott and a group was called ECPAT, it's now called PACT, to create the training videos that are free to every hotelier. And that was right out of the gate, that was a big deal, is to make sure that they were free. And when I say free, it's free for the employees and the hotels to use.
Sure.
Obviously it costs a lot of money on the other end. And we were willing to invest in that. I got to thank Marriott. They did an amazing job, put a ton of money into it as well. But we wanted to make sure everyone had opportunity and access, and there was no excuses. Like you couldn't say, well, I don't know who to do for training. Like, here it is. We'll give it to you for free. But then we took the next step, and we actually went to, because one of the things AHLA does and does exceptionally well is lobby on behalf of the hotel industry. And we would go to lawmakers and say, look, we're for mandating training to every hotel. And most lawmakers would say, wait a minute, we don't ever have businesses come to us and say, place a mandate on us.
Please put a mandate on us.
Right. And they're like, why would you do that? And I'm like, well, one, it's the right thing to do. But I said, secondarily, we don't want a scenario where traffickers say, okay, this brand is doing it, these guys are doing it, this state's doing it, but these folks aren't doing it. So now they begin to traffic in places where they don't think the training occurs. Or maybe the big hotels do it, but the small hotels don't. We didn't want that situation. So we're like, look, this needs to be equally applied to everybody. We've created a product that is free for everyone, so there's no reason why they can't do it. And if we can do that, then traffickers look at the entire industry and say, okay, hotels are not a safe place for me to do my business.
Right, and we've definitely seen that. We've seen traffickers that will think twice, and they will end up somebody will end up in an Airbnb, or those locations will shift because that message has really gotten out. So where are things now? You definitely had to push the envelope to get them on board, but how many people ended up being trained during your time at AHLA?
Oh gosh,
over 1 million, right?
Oh yeah, it was closer when I left last year. It was close to 2 million. And so, the goal was make sure every hotel employee is trained. And different states approached it different ways. Some states said, train them once. Some states said, no, train them annually. Some states said, train them within 30 days of being hired, and then every other year you have to train again, which is good. But we never want to become a point where they're just not paying attention.
Sure.
Like, we wanted to pay attention.
Right.
But the products are changing too, right? And so the training, and it's not just PACT. Other folks have training out there that is good. And because of COVID, the perpetrators, the bad guys, figured out ways to get around some of the things that were being done. And so the training did need to be advanced. And technology is different today than even it was 5 years ago. And we now have technology that can tell us how many times people are coming in and out of rooms, especially if they're in the back of the hotel somewhere. You look for these signs. And that's what it's all about. It's like, look for the signs, understand what that means, and then not more important, but as important, who do you contact?
Right.
Because if you see things and you're like, I don't know who to talk to, that's not good, right? So you have to be able to contact somebody. But I will say, you mentioned Airbnb. I know in talking to folks in the short-term rental industry, they are working on these same type solutions as well, which they should be commended for. It's a different setup because oftentimes you don't have the manager on site, you don't have security on site, but there are things, especially around booking details, that you can look at to determine, are there trends here of someone who would be committing this crime? And then again, what do you do with that information?
I think that's been one of the most encouraging parts for me, is convening a working group of the hospitality vendor community and all the technologists. I've had the opportunity of seeing, okay, how can we think about, yes, there's training to equip employees on what they're observing, but there's a lot of things that a wide variety of businesses can do on this issue, whether it's how many times the door is opening, closing. It can be things around how is the payment coming into, being made, the booking style. We've seen Bluetooth devices, how many, and upload downs, but there's just a lot of information that's out there at this point. And so I'm excited to see where I think the hospitality industry will continue to lean into this. To your point, it's not a stagnant response. We have to continue to evolve and be really proactive in these approaches.
Which is why those training mandates are so important, because you can quickly identify a scenario where a nice resort that has the resources to put in this type of technology, a trafficker is going to look at that and say, okay, that's not
right.
But
budget hotel.
A budget hotel, particularly if it's a exterior corridor hotel where they don't have to go through the lobby. those people have got to be trained. And
Right.
that training is not, I mean, it's not just the people at the front desk. It's not just the
Right.
security people. It's the people that are going into the rooms. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
we were talking just a moment ago about whether it's going into hotel rooms or going into homes, people that go into, frankly, living situations
Right.
can be some of the greatest frontline folks that can detect these things, or at least identify things and say, that doesn't look right.
Yeah. We were talking earlier, there's a group that came to us it's a company called Forshaw, and they came to us during COVID and said, listen, the world's shut down. Mandatory reporters aren't seeing kids, but we're going into 20 to 30% of homes across America as a pest management industry. Can you train us? Can you equip us to identify the signs of trafficking? And so that was one that we had the opportunity to train them, but also to see really significant situations where children that were being trafficked during COVID that would have otherwise not been seen were identified. And so I think that's been interesting is how the hospitality industry really stepped up and I would say led the way for the businesses intersecting this industry head on, or the anti-trafficking industry head on. But then others started to really jump in and realize, hey, talking about this isn't a bad business case, isn't a bad thing for business. So talk about who else started to kind of
Right.
catch wind of this.
It's interesting. You've never come upon a politician or a business owner or anyone who says, hey, I really don't care about this. I mean, people, they actually do care about it, especially when they start to realize the depth of the problem, right?
Sure.
And who the victims are. And so, but most of the time they either don't know or they're like, well, somebody else is taking care of that, so I don't need to take care of that. When we started in the hotel industry, one of the things we pointed out was when someone stays at a hotel, it's a journey, right? At some point they leave their house, they are in a train, a plane, a car, and they eventually arrive at a hotel. And then when they're at that hotel, they're going to the restaurants and everything else around the hotel, being involved in the activities. And then they're getting back in the train, plane, or car and going somewhere else, right? And so we're like, how do we encapsulate that entire process?
Yeah.
And so, I got to hand it to folks like, Uber and Lyft and the ride-hailing services. They've done a phenomenal job. The airlines have done an incredible job that extends beyond the airlines into the airports themselves. I know for years, going in and out of the Atlanta airport, which I went out of a lot, the signs were there, the little voice on the little plane train was there. And so people took it seriously and began to say, well, look, we can do something about it. But sometimes it also takes that emotional connection. I mean, it even happens for me. I won't forget we did a lot of events right before major sporting events. So I was in Los Angeles right before the Super Bowl, and we had law enforcement there and everybody involved in that greater LA area, knowing that, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were coming for the Super Bowl. And then you had traffickers.
Which fuels the demand.
Yeah, of course. And I'm sitting there, I'm about to go up on stage to talk about what the hotel industry is doing. And one of the groups put out in front of us a sheet of paper with like 30 girls from the LA area that had been abducted within the last like 18 months that were still missing. And that almost every one of those is involved in trafficking. And you're like, wow. Like we talk about 40 million people globally being trafficked. And we talk about, the statistics around this, which are mind-numbing at times. But when you hold up that picture, which I did, I took it up on stage. I was like, this is why we're here today. Like, imagine if one of these young girls was your daughter, your sister, your niece. Like, and these are all real girls that less than 2 years ago could have been sitting in this room with us. And today, their parents don't know where they are. Like, if you can't find in your heart to join a cause to help save even one of them, just find one of them.
Right.
Then maybe you're not alive, but you need to do some self-introspection. And so sometimes you have to make those personal connections. And like I said, most people will say, I want to be part of this. Let me find a way. So getting back to your original question, from the getting in that car or getting in that airplane to getting to the hotel to then the restaurants being involved, like everybody is now playing a part. And it wasn't because they didn't want to. It was because they just needed either the inspiration or the knowledge of how to take part.
Yeah. And these aren't just trainings. I think that's the thing that is incredible is that there are stories after stories after stories of girls or boys that are being identified, that things are happening. They're being identified by employees, maybe by guests who have been able to have access to the training, and they're able to get out of that trafficking situation. We've personally seen Uber drivers who have identified victims and reached out to us for help, and then they've kind of helped them exit. We've seen hospitality. So it's incredible to see that this awareness and moving beyond awareness into deep training is actually converting into action and converting into lives saved.
Well, and I would even go further. I mean, we were at the Phoenix Super Bowl with a team on the ground and doing a lot of that work to go in. And we had, the National Center's list of children that were missing. And, our team was identifying those kids on the street around the Super Bowl and being able to help law enforcement extract those kids and finally get them to safety. But part of that entire triage process was, where do you just take them for that immediate moment? And we had some of the hotels that, invested their rooms, even though they could have made so much money on those rooms during the Super Bowl. They saw the extreme value of just creating that safe place in that immediate moment and coming alongside. And so I think
which is
it has become not just a tagline for the hospitality industry to raise money on or to show support. They truly are working to do this at every level.
Yeah, and I'll give you a perfect story about kind of the ancillary businesses that get involved. We had an organization, because we talked about it all the time. Every time I was on stage, I talked about it, and I was on stage that you guys
you were
twice
there.
a week for 6 years, and one of the vendors who is in their companies does all the audiovisual in most major hotels across the U.S. They're like, look, we have thousands of employees out there working in the hotels, and they're traveling all the time. Can we have our employees trained? We're like, absolutely. So they took the training, and one of their employees was on a flight, say it was United Airlines, and noticed something that was like, that does not look right, because they'd taken the training. Mentioned to the flight attendant. The flight attendant called law enforcement. Law enforcement looked it up and said, yeah, absolutely, that's the person we've been trying to find.
Wow.
Plane lands, they arrest the person on the spot and save 3 girls. We had a hotel at LAX, same thing, and they'd been trained using the system, and they identified a young lady who had gotten out, had gone into the bathroom, and law enforcement, they contacted law enforcement, as they should. They broke up the ring, and there were, I think, 11 girls in the hotel at that time that were being trafficked.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, I think what was really neat, or not neat, but a really moving story for us is we were traveling in Chicago recently and came across a labor trafficking ring that was operating right there, broad daylight, Michigan Ave. And having kids. We had at least 3 minors that were being labor trafficked there, and the gang members were sitting there just overseeing this. And, we worked really hard to get the law enforcement response, and it was just not coming as quickly as we really needed it to. But we were in front of a Marriott property. And so being able to go in there and speak directly with their security team, knowing that they had been trained, was instrumental in helping at that moment bridge a very immediate need. And so I think that just for us even is seeing it play out in real time.
Yeah. And they had been seeing it. They had, he knew exactly what it was. He knew exactly who the kids were. He said they've been out there for a while. They'd called local law enforcement that I don't think had been equipped to understand what trafficking really looked like. And so we were able to bring in federal agencies. But he was so helpful to even connect him to federal agencies to be able to say, hey, let's move beyond what we saw at a moment in time, and let's be able to talk about what was happening holistically.
Yeah.
And it's important, too, that when we think about trafficking, I remind people it's not a Liam Neeson movie, right? Does that happen? Yes.
Sure.
But these are typically folks, as you know far better than I, that are, they go after young people on social media. And it's not just sexual trafficking. It is also labor trafficking, as you said, which, because some people think, it's just young girls and sex trafficking. And first of all, if that's all it was, we still need to be just as dedicated to stopping it. But it's also young boys that are getting part of gangs and labor trafficking, and then folks coming across the border and their papers are stolen if they have papers, and if not, they're being threatened to go to law enforcement, and they abuse them. And, we should all be concerned about that, right? And so but when you think about it as labor trafficking as well, then you recognize it happens in different places than you would think of just for sex trafficking.
Yeah. I think that was one thing that was so interesting, is seeing how the hospitality industry was, training and equipping themselves to understand how to identify trafficking in their hotels. But then it went further, and we saw some of these companies really making sure that they were vetting out their supply chains to make sure that it wasn't happening, that labor trafficking wasn't happening in the soaps that they were using in the
Yeah.
hotels. And how far-reaching did that go?
There was a big push for it. And that was when I was leaving my role there. So I'm not sure how much further it went, but I kind of started that. I'm saying, look, we're impacting trafficking here in the U.S. that's happening at the property level. But what about, to your point, particularly the labor trafficking that's happening in foreign countries that are providing the goods that we're knowingly purchasing, right?
Sure.
We're not just taking a guess that this is happening. We know for a fact it is. How can we change our supply chain decisions to avoid that? And let it be known that if that's what you're doing, if you're using labor, trafficking in labor to produce these things, you're going to lose your business, right? And so I hope all industries will continue to push in that direction because it makes a big difference. I remember having a one-on-one very similar to this with former DHS Secretary Mayorkas, and he was always very complimentary of what we're doing. And he said, look, if I could get every industry to step up the way the hotel industry's done, we would really put a dent in this. And so, I'm sure the Trump administration is doing the same thing and really making sure that this goes beyond just the obvious entities. And one that deserves a ton of credit is the trucking industry.
Right.
Trucking industry has done amazing work on this because if you think of someone who's a trucker, what are they seeing every day? On the road, at bus stations and truck stops and places like that, what are they seeing? And they can be an army for good.
Yeah. We had a trafficking victim that we had the opportunity to help, and her trafficker was a long-haul truck driver. We actually have two that we've worked with that their traffickers were long-haul truck drivers that were moving them from place to place, trafficking them wherever they would go, and they were terrified to escape and ask for help. But the opportunities to equip people like that to train and understand what it looks like and then equip them to respond is critical. And we've talked a little bit about it. That's why Simply Report, the tool that we just launched, is so critical where people have the ability to see something. They don't have to always be trained observers. They can just report the things that they're seeing. And then it goes into a system where it's vetting whether or not it's a likelihood of trafficking and then routing it immediately to the appropriate law enforcement authorities. And they don't have to guess geographically, where am I? I don't even know what city I'm in. I've been traveling for 4 days. It really helps take the guesswork out of that. And I think that's going to be really helpful for the trucking industry.
Yeah, I mean, I put myself in the shoes of someone who is trying to investigate this. And there's a lot of good law enforcement people that do
Absolutely.
that.
Right.
Every little bit of information helps.
Absolutely.
Right. And even if you, as someone who sees something, says, well, they're not going to really care about that. No, go ahead. Let them make the determination of whether they care about it or not. Because if it doesn't look right, maybe it's not right. Maybe it's completely innocent. That's fine. They'll work through that.
Right. Well, I think it's always interesting to talk to our law enforcement partners about what are the things that actually help them in those investigations. And I remember one detective sharing that it was actually a receipt that was in the trash can, and the receipt was actually from further up the highway. But because that receipt was there, they could start to corroborate the victim's testimony. And so sometimes we look at something as simple as a receipt in a trash can, we don't see it. That's just not the piece of information that we would know. But it, to your point, every little piece of data helps in these very complex investigations that take years to really unravel the complexity.
But to your point, your product allows someone to take what they see or hear and share it in a very easy way, as opposed to trying to track down, okay, how do I contact somebody? What do I like? It makes it so much easier.
Right.
Yeah. And bringing it back to the trucking situation, if there is the same truck driver that is trafficking somebody coast to coast, it will actually link all of those different cases together. If somebody's putting in eventually a license plate or more detailed descriptions or a name. And so things that normally would be siloed for a local law enforcement agency to receive a report, but they don't understand what's happening in other parts of the country, it starts to pull those systems together in order to create that more effective picture for law enforcement. And so those are the things that we get excited about where, again, people, oftentimes you've got good law enforcement agencies whose hands have been tied because of the siloed information. And so we start to break those down and progress can start to be made. So speaking of progress, where do you see some of the better opportunities moving forward in this field? What are the things that you feel like need to be focused on from a hospitality sector, from a
Right.
business sector, being able to lean in?
I mean, it's the things we've talked about. It's both technology and data sharing, right? I'm thinking about like the technology that existed even 5 years ago. A hotel had no knowledge of when someone who asked for a room in the back of the hotel, how often they were coming in and out of that room.
Right.
They had no knowledge. Today, there's technology out there that can, even on a multi-level hotel, can tell you exactly which room, how many people are in that room, how many people are coming in and out of that room, what time they're coming in and out of that room. Things like that are critical signs. It just didn't exist a few years ago, right? And then, let's say that you don't have enough information. That's a data point, right, that you share with law enforcement. They don't have enough information to go after somebody at that spot. But let's say we now identify that person 2 days later is in another hotel across town doing the exact same thing.
Right.
Now you begin putting all that together. And like, okay, this is beginning to build a case for us. And so just that ability to share using products like yours across the spectrum of law enforcement agencies, across the spectrum of law enforcement localities, but also having technology that can, find out if people are doing things that are considerably out of the normal course of activity in a hotel.
Right. It really just goes to that whole idea of collective impact. Like when we each see something and say something, no matter how small it is, we might just be one part of that puzzle, but it starts to come into view rather than just ignoring kind of that instinct that we sometimes have that we're like, something just feels wrong. I don't know what it is, but I can at least say something to start the process.
And if you see, like, let's say, the traditional thing you see is two people that get together and it does not look normal, does not feel normal whatsoever. If you report it and then no one else reports it, what's law enforcement going to do with that?
Right.
But if 30 minutes later, somebody else reports it. And 30 minutes later, somebody else reports it. And it's in different places. Now they're starting to say, okay, this does not feel right because too many people are witnessing the same thing and reporting it. That is how this helps.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Could you, I want to, because I always try to get this point out to people, and you guys are the experts on this. There's this notion for people that haven't gone into this deep like we have, that someone's being trafficked, they just want out of the life of trafficking, and it's just that easy. If you can just save them from that hotel room, they can go back to their family and all is well.
That would be great.
That would be great, but that is not reality, right?
No.
And explain that, because I think the recidivism in this is such a big problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. And chime in here. But I think the things that we always see is that you've got those that really harsh narratives have been built up in their mind. Nobody cares. Nobody wants you. You can leave and there's nowhere to go. You're not going to make it on your own, or you'll be back. I mean, that unfortunately for a lot of those who have been in trafficking for quite a while, because unfortunately it's obviously very difficult to get out. They test the waters. They'll try to leave. They'll go to a domestic violence shelter. And sometimes those groups don't understand the nuances of trafficking, and they get exactly what the traffickers tell them they will get. And so, and we always say it's easier to live in the hell of a predictable situation than risk the joy of an unpredictable one. They have to trust people that they don't know to provide food, shelter, clothing, safety, resources.
Right.
And sometimes they don't know that they can trust that, or they've been failed by systems so many times. But the reality is they eventually, if they find their way to Safe House Project at least, are met with those resources. And we get to help them heal and get to help them find the right place for them that's really quality for the trauma that they've endured. And that's where we do get to see lives transformed. We get to help them get into a safe home that, again, it's education, life skills training, therapy, all of those different elements. And so we get really excited when we see that happen. But it's hard. It's not a moment in time. It's not a Liam Neeson movie, Taken, because if they had just been kidnapped and hadn't endured significant trauma, maybe.
Yeah.
But that's not the case.
Well, I always remind people, again, setting aside the kidnapping, there are circumstances that someone finds themselves in that they fall into trafficking. If you rescue them from that immediate trafficking situation, those circumstances that created it in the
Haven't gone
first
away.
place are probably the same. And so if you don't change that, then they're susceptible, very susceptible, to going right back into it. So if you want to stop trafficking, yes, it's great that we save everybody. But if we can save somebody on a permanent basis, then those numbers go down significantly.
Right. And I think that's what I found to be really critical about making sure that we are ethically capturing data around what are the vulnerabilities and what are the things that allowed for somebody to get into that trafficking experience. Because when we can articulate vulnerabilities and we can see the risk indicators, then we start to move out of this very reactive state that we've lived in, where everything comes down to having to really use very costly interventions in order to support somebody. But if we can build better prevention models and we can move towards preventing something or early intervention or early interdiction, then we're going to be more effective in these long-term outcomes on behalf of individuals. But I absolutely agree that we have to realize where our deficiencies are in community and work to fill those gaps.
Yeah, and if I had one message for parents that I often share is your teenage child doesn't really have a right to privacy in your home with the device that you bought them.
Yes and amen.
Right?
Yeah.
I tell my children this all the time.
You should know what they're doing because it is online where this is happening, right?
Yeah.
And you may think that there's no way my child, in suburbia ABC with two loving parents and not in poverty, there's no way it could ever happen to them. You can show them thousands of cases of
Right.
children exactly like theirs where that has happened. And so yes, it can happen. It is happening.
Right.
And you owe it to your children to make sure that you're monitoring what they're doing.
The other day, I was doing a training of 1,000 students, and I asked the room, I said, how many of you have a nude photo on your phone or know that the person next to you has a nude photo on your phone?
Right.
What percentage of my room do you think raised their hand?
How old?
This was 9th graders.
Probably 80%.
100% of the room raised their hand. And that's not to say that all of them, that those were images of themselves,
Right.
but they had received those images. To your point, like they knew that those were floating out there. And with the rise in sextortion and how that leads to blackmail and our kids being so vulnerable online, I mean, really, the smartphone has made every child accessible and susceptible to predatory behavior. And if we aren't doing our job as parents to educate our kids, then we're really missing the mark. Yeah. We spend a year training them and equipping them to drive a car, and yet we hand them a device which is arguably more dangerous than anything else, and we don't look back.
Well, interesting. I would imagine if you took those 1,000 kids and then you went to another room and you included the 1,500 parents, the parents of those 1,000 kids, and said, raise your hand if you think your kid has these photos, I bet 30% would raise their hand.
Totally.
I agree.
Right?
I agree.
Yeah.
But I think it makes me think of a story that almost ties all this together. So there was a very high-profile case that hit the news several years ago. Young girl who had been talking to somebody online. The grooming had been happening, and she was at an event with her father, left. And the perception was that she had been kidnapped. And manhunt ensued, all the bells and whistles went off across the country, and they were looking for, eventually found her, I think about a week later, 4 days or a week later, in another state. She had been trafficked, and they got her home, and it was one of those big scenarios where everybody celebrated that she was home,
Right.
but she didn't get the healing that she needed. And ended up spiraling, and we ended up having the opportunity to serve her about a year and a half after this had happened.
Wow.
And but all of those things happened that they didn't understand the online safety. It was actually those who had seen her along the journey that helped put the pieces together for law enforcement to eventually track her down. It was technology that understood, that was able to track down the similarities in different hotel room carpet, I think, that had been posted online, that they were able to figure out the hotel. It was all of those different pieces working. But at the end of the day, she was, rescued in this situation by law enforcement. And she didn't get the healing and still felt broken. And so now she's been able to really get the healing that she needed and is on a better path. But all of those different touch points could have yielded a different story if they hadn't happened or if training hadn't been in place. And so I think it's critical to just see all of the different ways that this touches our society and all of the different intervention points that have to be continually strengthened.
Right. And that's where I think most people don't have a full comprehension. You can briefly put yourself in the mind of someone who's been trafficked and say, wow, that would be damaging for my whole life. But it's such a dark place. I don't think people want to stay there. They're like, let me go back to what's for dinner tonight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't realize that this poor young girl, like, that's with her until she goes through a significant transformation. Like the healing process is not going to happen like that. Like, oh, I'm back home, everything's great. No, it's going to stick with them for a long time. It is a life-altering occurrence. Yeah.
Right. No, and I think so many of the survivors that we get to walk alongside every single day know the complexities of this healing journey. You know, they know it inside and out. And as long as we're listening and hearing from them on how we can best support them, that's the best way for all of us to really increase our understanding. And so I know that every one of these stories that we get to intersect helps to really inform every single moment. So I really love that what we've talked about here today is collective impact. It's
Right.
every part of our community, the public sector, the private sector, our policymakers, and our NGOs working together. So I guess as we come toward a close, if you had one message that you wanted to share from all of your lenses of expertise, what is it that you would want people to remember?
It's a two-part process. And, I was proud to be part of this when I was in the hotel industry, and they've continued on with this in a magnificent way. So kudos to everyone who's played a part in this. We want to prevent trafficking from ever happening. And we should all be collectively unified in saying, what can we do to make sure this never happens? But we also have to recognize that it does happen. And when it does happen, what can we do to help the survivors so that they don't have it happen to them again, right? And if we can focus on just those two things, how do we stop it from happening? And how do we help the people who've become victims of this? That is, I always used to think of it as like, that's the holistic approach that we should be taking. And recognize that, you talked about that amazing goal. Trafficking has always been with us. Trafficking is always going to be with us. But if we save one life, I would go to my grave thinking, I saved this person. That's more than I could have ever imagined. But we can save not just one, hundreds and thousands, and potentially millions of lives if we are committed to this. Like, the goal should be there is no trafficking whatsoever. Recognizing that in our lifetime we're probably not going to reach it, but that doesn't mean it's not a worthy goal, right? And so stopping the trafficking and helping those who are victims, just focus on those two things.
Yeah. Well, you heard it here. The vision is to eradicate human trafficking. How we're going to get there, we don't all know.
Yeah.
But we wake up every single day committed to seeing lives changed, transformed, and to doing everything that we can as individuals and collectively to eradicate human trafficking. Thank you for joining us today on Team Protectors. You are part of a movement of people to eradicate human trafficking. So subscribe, like, and drop a 5-star review if you're on Apple Podcast. We look forward to having you for the next episode of the Team Protectors podcast.